Nicole has been a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator for over 30 years. She's worked in many different settings throughout the Bay Area, including hospitals, diabetes clinics, home care, and pharmacies. She is deeply passionate about advocating for patients, particularly those who face socioeconomic barriers to diabetes care and resources. She's skilled in translating current science into practice, and we're thrilled to have us join us and share her experience and have a discussion with you all.
Okay, thank you. We're ready to roll. All right. So glad to have everyone with us today. Okay, so we're going to talk about start with how the body normally works. So here's my little old cute cartoon about how the body works with diabetes. Typically, we wake up in the morning and what's normal blood sugar levels, which it's kind of funny, a lot of people we don't really know what normal is sometimes, right? So normal blood sugar, first thing in the morning or before food, normal blood sugar runs between 70 and 100. Then we eat some food, and some of that food digests and turns into glucose. The blood sugar levels rise. What's normal is to be no higher than 140 at 1 hour after eating. So then our pancreas will be triggered to then produce insulin, and it's insulin that will bring our glucose down. So over here it's showing our pancreas secreting insulin, and we often show insulin like a little key because insulin's a hormone, and which just means that it's a trigger. So it's a little messenger. So the pancreas produces this insulin, goes to our cells, and says, cells, okay, open up and allow that glucose to be absorbed into our cells. So then once the glucose is in the cells, then we're able to burn that blood sugar. Down here at the bottom is where it's showing that glucose is sitting in the bloodstream, and it's getting quite concentrated. So a whole bunch of G's, a whole bunch of glucose. So what happens with diabetes is the glucose is in the wrong spot. The glucose is in the bloodstream, and if it's just remaining in the blood, then our body is actually not able to use it. So that's really the problem with diabetes, is that the sugar is literally in the blood and not in the cells, so it's in the wrong spot. And this is really kind of in a nutshell why we get a lot of problems with diabetes. Is because the glucose is in the blood, where then the blood becomes really sticky. And it sticks to the arteries, it thickens our blood. We get all kinds of problems when we have high glucose, high blood sugar. So it's in the wrong spot again. So these are various organs that regulate the blood glucose. Of course, the pancreas is, the number one organ that has to do with diabetes. So deep inside the pancreas, we have these very specialized beta cells. And it's the beta cells that produce insulin for us. So if we don't have enough beta cells that produce insulin for us, that's one reason why we have diabetes. Other organs that really regulate blood sugar is our liver. So if you think of your liver as your gas tank, that's a pretty good characterization. So again, here, when we eat our food, the glucose goes up in our bloodstream, and then the blood carries that glucose, and then it's supposed to then enter the cells. So when I say cells, I'm meaning every cell of our body. And some of the biggest places and the cells that are very important are the cells of the liver. So it is the liver that literally takes the food that we eat, and then we store it in our liver like our gas tank. And so that's, the role of the liver is we store the glucose in the gas tank, and then the liver will put the glucose back into our bloodstream as we need it, just like fueling a car. And then, of course, another place is that we're storing calories also in our fat cells and in our muscle cells. So the muscles and the fat cells, they help to regulate our blood sugar as well. If we have a lot of muscle, if we're very fit, then we're able to burn sugar well. And then on the other side, if we're not very fit and we're sitting around a lot, we're not really using our muscles, then our muscles aren't really burning up that sugar. So the glucose enters the bloodstream and it can just kind of sit there because we're not really burning that glucose off. So I'm going to go back to the first slide here. So this, the idea of what is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes has everything to do with the pancreas. It is simply that the pancreas, maybe there's complete lack of beta cells, or the beta cells are so incredibly low that we don't have enough insulin in the body. Whereas type 2 diabetes often starts more at the cell level. It's that perhaps the liver is very full of calories, the fat cells are very full of calories, and so the pancreas does still work in type 2. We do still have some insulin, but perhaps the liver is too full and it isn't able to accept calories or other fat cells of the body. So every cell of our body just has a certain capacity for storing calories. And if our cells are just so stuffed with calories that then there's no place for additional glucose to go, that's kind of the classic type 2 diabetes. So, there's kind of two ends of the spectrum. Is that type 1 is that we don't make enough insulin or no insulin, and type 2 is that it's more of a storage of calorie problem. But for most people, people that are type 2, that's most people that have diabetes. Type 1 is really only 7% of all of the population of people that have diabetes are type 1. So most everyone has type 2 diabetes. But with type 2 diabetes, it isn't just that our cells are too full. There's usually a component of both. It's that the pancreas doesn't have enough beta cells, so we're insufficient, and also that we are often experiencing a problem with too much storage in our body. So the type 2 diabetes, it can be a progressing condition. So it's thought that at the time that diabetes is diagnosed, 30 to 50% of those beta cells are lost. So we are actually starting at a deficit or an insufficiency in how much insulin that we make. And then over time, the pancreas produces less insulin. So, the pancreas itself, ages and then makes less insulin as we go along or as we age. So most people with type 2 diabetes do eventually need insulin. So a lot of people think, well, does that mean that we convert? Do we go from type 1 from type 2 to type 1? Technically, no, but for all intents and purposes, you could say we do get dependent on insulin because we simply are not making enough. So, there are a lot of different causes of type 2. What does cause those beta cells inside the pancreas to become destroyed? And can the cells ever renew themselves? These are the real hot topic questions. There's a lot of factors with the beta cells being destroyed. Sometimes it's just simply cellular stress. If the pancreas is overworked and must secrete insulin all the time, then the beta cells do tend to die off. So if we're kind of constantly running a little sweet in our blood, the pancreas's job is to secrete insulin to bring that glucose down. So if it's constantly having to work hard to bring the sugar down, the cells can die off more. So that's kind of how diet plays a huge role in diabetes and the progression of diabetes. There's also, environmental factors. Veterans that were subjected to a lot of Agent Orange, they actually develop diabetes as well because the beta cells are very sensitive cells. So that's, there's probably many, many things that cause beta cell death, and those are just two simple ones. Can the cells ever renew themselves? Well, perhaps. That's actually there's a lot of research going on right now to try to get the beta cells to rejuvenate. And I think that it is promising that we might be able to start to cure this over time. And some of the newer medications now are showing some promise that it helps that the pancreas can rejuvenate itself. So there is some hope. So this is showing what normal insulin release, how normal insulin release works from the pancreas. So the pancreas is always providing some background insulin. So our little pancreas, it's really constantly producing insulin. When we're not eating, we're sleeping all night long, that little pancreas is kind of dripping out a little bit of insulin all the time. So we call that the background or basal rate insulin that our pancreas makes. So it's always making some. It's going drip, 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 drip all the time. And then when we eat a meal, it has to go squirt to cover that meal. So it's kind of interesting to know how the pancreas works. And then people that use insulin, then we mimic this. Going back to the very first slide here, I wanted to mention about how type 2 diabetes is very genetic. Type 1 diabetes also has a genetic component to it, but type 2 diabetes has the most, type 2 diabetes is very, very genetic. Talking about cellular storage, right? Some people have the capacity to just store calories and never have any problem with diabetes. But then there's others of us, probably I would say at least 60% of the population of humans, that get to where their cells are basically full. Very scientific term, but they're full up. And, I think that's a genetic component where some of us are great at storing calories and others of us don't. And the people that tend to have type 2 diabetes and have a problem with storing all these extra calories tend to be kind of the apple body type of the apple figure, right? And people with that apple figure, they often don't have much ability to store calories on their arms and on their legs. So we store all the calories right in the middle, and we also fill up our liver quite a bit. So, our body type is very much ruled by our genetics. And so people that have that body type, we're not really able to store calories in the arms and the legs. We don't store calories all over. We tend to store calories right through the middle and in the liver. So fatty liver, again, plays a really big role. So the liver is, one of the biggest regulators of glucose. When we talk about diabetes, most of the time we just talk about, the pancreas making insulin, but the liver plays such a big role in diabetes. So if the liver is full, this is the main place that we store our calories. And if the liver is full, then we don't have that ability to take the calories out of our bloodstream and store it in our liver. So, again, diet, exercise, burning off calories, not putting so many calories into the liver is what, that's how you control your blood sugars for the most part. To prevent and to treat fatty liver, what do we do the most? We actually limit carbohydrates. You would think that maybe you don't want to have a low-fat diet, but actually it's not a low-fat diet that helps fatty liver. It's a low-carb diet that helps fatty liver. And again, fatty liver and diabetes just goes hand in hand. So I want to talk about this a little bit more, mostly because I want the message to come through that, again, it's very genetic, and it's not your fault. I think that there's so much guilt with diabetes that, I really wanted to let people know it's very genetic. And of course, you can be mindful of your diet and your lifestyle, and of course that helps to control diabetes. But, the fact that we get diabetes is, is just deep inside of ourselves. Even animals get diabetes. So, it's a very common condition. Okay, so going into just, looking at, this is what normal blood sugars would do throughout the day. So this is like every time we eat a meal, we wake up, the fasting, we call that fasting first thing in the morning, and this is kind of the blood glucose goals for people with diabetes. So really not necessarily 100, but the goal for fasting blood sugar, we're looking at 80 to no higher than 130 before meals, And then after meals, the goal is to keep the blood sugar no higher than 180. Okay. Now, earlier I was giving you numbers of what is normal. So if you can get to normal blood sugars, great, no more power to you. But if you have diabetes, these are the goal targets for people living with diabetes. And if you hit these targets, your risk for any complications with diabetes is much lower. And also, if you're within these goal targets where your fasting is below 130, or your before meals are below 130, and your after meals are no higher than 180, your A1C lines up to be really good, and that's typically below 7%. So here again is the same numbers in a chart form. So before meals, we're targeting 70 to 100, and 1 to 2 hours after a meal, goal for diabetes, between 120 and 180. Okay, so, for many years, we had been hearing the 2 hours after a meal. The ADA just recently revised that, and now they're saying 1 to 2 hours after a meal. So I actually think it's much easier for people to test it 1 hour after. The logistics of waiting for 2 hours, most of the time people forget. They're on to doing different things, doing other things, so they often will not check after a meal. So that's a great revision. Now, 1 hour after a meal, our goal is still to be below 180. And I think we actually don't emphasize enough testing after meals. So many people I meet, they just test this first thing in the morning. And of course, that should be one of our lowest sugars of the day. But then, if all day long, then you really spike up, and you don't test after meals, you'll have no idea if what you're eating actually makes a difference. So test after meals, that's really the most important time in my book. So some people will use a blood sugar log. This can be very handy to really see, where the problem is. So this is, your troubleshooting. And most of the time, the physicians don't really look at this. This isn't really for your doctor. Sometimes they might ask, your diabetes educator will ask to look at your numbers and help you troubleshoot. But this is really, keeping a log for yourself. So if you find that your A1C is high and you're wondering, well, what do I do? Where do I get started? How do I get that number down? I would suggest you start testing your blood sugar. It can be a lot of work, I realize. So you might think about just maybe beginning with testing twice a day. So start off testing first thing in the morning. And the chart, this format of blood sugar logs is really helpful to know. The format is that you line up all of your numbers in a row so that your fasting, you can see if there's a trend. And then you line up after lunches, after breakfast, after lunch, after dinner. So maybe you test twice a day, test your fasting, and then test after breakfast one day. The next day, test your fasting and test after lunch, a different day. Then the day after that, test the fasting and test after dinner. So if you do it in this very kind of standardized, mindful format, eventually you can see if a pattern emerges, and that's how you can troubleshoot if there's something going on with your meals. Okay, so how does blood glucose testing and using your meter kind of stack up to an A1C? Well, so your A1C, that's your lab test, right? When you're testing with your glucose meter, that's seeing what your blood sugar is at that very point in time. But your A1C is letting you know what's going on overall. So it's a very interesting test. It is a very literal test. So what we're doing is we draw your blood out, and these little circles, the big circles here, these are your red blood cells. And so the test is actually determining how much glucose is sticking to your red blood cells. So the blue dots on these circles is glucose. So it's how much glucose is sticking to your red blood cells. Okay. Your red blood cells are made by your bone marrow. and your red blood cells will live about 3 months, and then they get old, raggedy, and break down, and then you get new blood, right? So essentially, we get an oil change every 3 months. So we're drawing your blood out, we're seeing how much glucose is sticking to the red blood cells, because glucose is sticky, right? So glucose will stick to the red blood cell a little bit, and if you don't have diabetes, even normally with just, a normal blood sugar level, you still have a little bit of glucose stuck to the red blood cells, and more specifically, it's stuck to the hemoglobin of your red blood cells. So that's why the name is called hemoglobin A1C. Now, as you run a little sweeter and you have more glucose in your blood, on a daily basis, you have more and more glucose sticking to the red blood cell. So again, it's very literal. How much glucose is sticking to the red blood cells? If it's sticking to the red blood cells, it's also sticking to other parts of the body. So, so it's a good determination as if we're going to get complications from diabetes. Because if you've got sticky glucose on the red blood cells, it's also sticking to your eyes and your kidneys and your arteries, and that's what, is the problem with diabetes, right? Those are the complications we get. It literally comes down to how much sugar do you have in your blood on an average basis, and how much sugar is sticking to you much of the time. So again, if your red blood cells are living, 3 months, and you have an A1C of 7%, over here, this chart is telling you that your estimated average glucose is about 154. So we're essentially saying keep the glucose, the average level, in this range. Below 154 is a safe range, and we're going to limit complications from diabetes. But as you get stickier and stickier with your sugar, the glucose is sticking to more other parts of your body, you do get more complications. So that's really the relevance of your A1C lab, is saying, how sweet am I, how sticky am I, and how likely am I to get complications from the blood sugar? Okay, so I just kind of threw this in here, coping with diabetes. Anybody ever feel like this sometimes? Right? I just can't do it today. So, I wanted to kind of, remind you guys again to relieve yourself of the guilt of having diabetes. If that's often, I need to tell people over and over, it's not your fault of having diabetes. A lot of people get it, again, including animals. And so it really is just a matter of trying to control it and just taking steps to do, our lifestyle changes to control the blood sugar. But really try to give up on any guilt of having it, because the guilt can just be absolutely exhausting. The number one thing about just coping with diabetes is get rid of any guilt. Use positive self-talk whenever you possibly can remind yourself of all the things that you are doing right. Right? You're not doing everything wrong, so remind yourself of what you're doing right. Taking control of your environment, meaning, setting yourself up for success, putting away foods that might be tempting, getting yourself a good pair of shoes so that you make things easy for yourself to have your lifestyle changes. And then getting support from your family and friends. You don't want to listen to people that are blaming you, that are shaming you, making you feel guilty. That never helps, improving us, to control our blood sugar. We don't want the diabetes police. Sometimes the family and friends, they think that they're helping you by reminding you, and they don't understand, how it comes off. So, tell people that, if they're making you feel bad about it, you need to let them know how you feel, and then let them know how they can help you, if that's really what's going on. A lot of times, again, it goes back to that guilt part, is that your family and your friends, they are concerned, and so they're trying to help. They just might not know how to do it. So give that a little thought, because, we don't need to kind of pile on any more guilt to ourselves. So if you are coping well, you are able to do self-care in front of people, because, diabetes shouldn't be something that you're ashamed of. It's just, kind of a fact of life. There's so many people in the world that have diabetes. It's not something to be ashamed of. And when you can discuss it, with your family and with your friends, not to talk about it ad nauseum, but that if you're able to discuss it, that just means it's rather a neutral thing. And then there you go. You're able to perform self-care in front of people. But if you feel like, that you're ashamed and you're hiding, that to me is a flag that you're actually not coping that well with diabetes. And you want to give that more thought and unpack it. Okay. So what else is healthy coping? Well, all the emotions we have about diabetes are valid. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel depressed. All those things are completely normal. So, again, don't feel bad about the feelings that you have. You are allowed to feel the way you do. But healthy coping is just recognizing that sometimes your emotional reactions might interfere with your caring for yourself. So that's why I do go back to the guilt part so much, because, your emotions and how you're feeling about diabetes, if you're hiding it or it's interfering with caring for yourself, that can be quite the issue. Okay, so give that coping part some thought, and then I want to jump back into just controlling diabetes in general. So the 3 pillars of diabetes control, it sounds kind of corny, but it's very much, it's like a 3-legged stool, right? We have diet, we have exercise, and we have medications. That really is the 3 legs of our stool. If they're in balance and we're able to manage these things, we have diabetes control here in the middle. So here it's showing, but everything still revolves around that pancreas. How healthy is the pancreas, right? When we're young, that pancreas works like gangbusters. There's usually no issue, unless someone develops type 1 diabetes, which is, by the way, an autoimmune disease that kind of destroys the beta cells. So many people that have type 1 diabetes, they do get it in childhood, but the most common time of getting type 1 is in teenage years, like 16 to 18-year-olds. But we are actually finding more and more adults with type 1. So technically, type 1 is an autoimmune disease. So that's just kind of an interesting tidbit to know that we're actually finding that we've actually been misdiagnosing many people for many years that are actually have type 1 diabetes. And one of the ways to know is if it's type 1 or if it's because of your pancreas is if you're thin and you have diabetes, it's not a problem that again, you didn't cause diabetes, right, no matter what. But if you're thin and you have diabetes, it certainly isn't because, you've been overeating. You're thin, and so then you're not actually able to put on or store a lot of calories. So insulin is a storage hormone. And if you don't make enough insulin, you're not able to store those calories. And so one of the things that happens is weight loss. So type 2 diabetes does have much more to do with being overweight, and so it's more of a calorie storage issue. So by burning off the extra calories, we can control it, right? So if you've ever noticed, check your blood sugar before you go for a walk. If you're high, go for a walk, and then check your blood sugar maybe, an hour after you get back, and then see how much blood sugar you've been able to burn off. Many people can burn off a good 50 points from just a half-an-hour walk. And, of course, diet's going to play a huge role. We're going to talk about that next. So today's lecture, I'm not going to talk about medications at all, but we can always do that another time if people are interested in learning about diabetes medications further. Okay. So some of the basic tips, really, really important things that just don't get talked about enough. We usually talk about diet, and exercise, diet, and exercise. But a lot goes into our numbers of blood sugar control. And I have to say, our sleep schedule, having good sleep hygiene is huge. If you don't have a good sleep, the next day your blood sugars tend to run high. And now that we're in the computer age, it seems that people are just busier than ever, and our sleep schedules have been even more disrupted. So people that are on the computer are getting too much screen time. The screens emit blue light into our eyes, and they make us much more wakeful. So we're finding that so many people are, not getting enough sleep. So then the next day, the blood sugars are running higher. So having good sleep hygiene is so very important. Try to, go to sleep by midnight. Get to bed. Don't stay up all night. People that stay up late, they're often eating more, and of course then that disrupts and you're eating more late at night. So that whole idea of doing intermittent fasting is basically just a very fancy way of saying, stop eating after 7 and then don't eat so much late at night. So that really goes into the eating schedule and meal planning, right? I know I sound like your mother, but get to bed and plan your meals. And then stress, your emotional well-being, taking care of yourself, self-care, going outside, getting some sunshine, listening to the birds. That all just gives us a much better feel of, overall well-being, which can have a very healing effect and actually drives down blood sugars overall. Okay, so if we're not planning meals and we're running around like a chicken, what do? We make poor food choices. So, again, I know I sound like, like somebody's mom, but so many times it really just comes down to these basics. It just comes down to having a routine, getting to bed, getting up, planning your day, going grocery shopping on a regular basis. And again and again, it comes back to meal planning. If we haven't done meal planning, we wait until we get hungry. I hear this all the time. I'm not hungry in the morning. So then they wait, and then you're super hungry, and then before you know it, you're eating the wrong thing, right? So planning your meals out makes a really big difference, and then having a little breakfast so that you stay ahead of your hunger. And then what's your style of eating? When you eat and how you eat really affects your blood sugar and your weight. So if you eat like a camel, where you go for long periods of time without eating, and then you eat, one big meal, that really wreaks havoc on blood sugars. It puts much more weight on us. If you skew your calories later in the day, it puts more weight on you because your body only has, a certain ability to store calories. So if you eat those calories all at one time, it kind of sits in the bloodstream because your cells are really not able to absorb those calories all at once. So it's, spread the load. On the other end of the spectrum, do you eat like a goat? Here's people that they don't really plan meals either, and they just kind of munch all day long, kind of like a lot of snack. And people that tend to, munch all day long, I find that they eat a lot of carbohydrates. It's usually, grab crackers, grab a pastry, grab some cookies, grab some fruit, and so it's, having sugar and starch. So think about that style of eating. This is what we're trying to achieve, where you have, more calories during the earlier part of the day when you're going to burn the calories. So you're going to burn, your breakfast meal, you're going to burn your lunch meal, and you don't want to eat, a whole lot at any given time. So if you think that the meal that you eat should be burned for calories and used up those calories in about 4 hours, that's kind of what makes sense. So then your blood sugar goes up and it has a chance to come back down again before you eat. So it's not, eating throughout the day just keeps your blood, if you're eating snacks all the time, your blood sugar just kind of stays up continuously. What we want to do is eat a meal, be done with it, let the blood sugar come back down to normal before you eat again. And then it's eating more calories at breakfast and lunch, maybe a small afternoon snack, so that that can be helpful so that you're not so hungry at dinner. And then dinner should be the lightest meal of the day, because that way your blood sugar then can come back down to normal. Then when you wake up in the morning, you're at normal levels. Now, this bottom part is really kind of how, most of us Americans have been, raised to eat. I know that's, this is what I did throughout my childhood. Had a small breakfast, run off to school, your medium-sized lunch, and then the dinner meal, the big meal at the end of the day. So this is what puts more weight on Americans. I think this is probably why more Americans are overweight than a lot of Europeans. We simply eat these great big dinners, and we eat more late at night. So then this makes your blood sugar go up at night, and you wake up high. So be super mindful about trying to eat your dinner smaller. So again, that should be the very lightest in calories is your dinner meal. Okay. Are you drinking your calories? So, any calories that you're taking in that's liquid form, especially, juice, it has more sugar than actual soda pop. But of course, soda and juice, wow, what does that do to your blood sugar, right? It hits your bloodstream so fast that it practically shocks your pancreas. Blood sugar shoots up. And if you do that a lot over time, that really drives diabetes. We know for a fact that liquid sugar in soda drives diabetes. And juice does as well. So don't drink any kind of juice. Don't drink any kind of soda. Jamba Juice, I wish they'd go out of business. Gatorade, vitamin water. I mean, there's so many products now that have, that is our liquid calories. It doesn't fill us up. It doesn't give us any satiety. So then, it's really easy to just drink down some calories and kind of forget, that we've actually taken anything in. I put coffee here. The coffee itself, just pure black coffee, is no problem. It has, like maybe 2 calories overall. So it's not the coffee itself. It's what you put in the coffee, of course. So coffee creamers, a lot of calories to them. Milk. For the most part, I'm not saying that milk is such a bad product, but you don't need more than about 2 6 to 8 ounce cups of milk in a day. So sometimes I find somebody that just really loves milk and they kind of forget how much sugar is in milk. Natural sugar, right? Milk has lactose, which is a natural sugar, so it can really contribute to blood sugar levels. And then over here, alcohol. Alcohol does not actually have sugar in it. Wine has about maybe 4 grams of carbohydrate. Beer has about 15, so it does have carbs. But mostly it's that alcohol has a lot of calories, so that's why I included that up here. Are you, again, drinking your calories? If weight is an issue, first thing you want to do is make sure that you're not drinking your calories. Okay. So carbohydrate groups and carbohydrates, what are those? I just keep saying over and over. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is just a fancy word for glucose-containing food. So anything that turns into sugar, and sugar itself is a carbohydrate. Again, just a fancy word for sugar or for glucose. So your carbohydrate foods are starches, fruits, milk, and yogurt. So the milk and yogurt has lactose, that's a type of glucose or carbohydrate. Fruits have fructose, that's a type of carbohydrate. And starches. Starches are long chains of glucose. So they all turn into sugar as we digest them. So the form of the carbohydrate, whether it's starch or sugar, what's the difference? Well, starch is long chains of glucose, and it takes a little bit longer to digest, whereas sugar is a short chain. It's just like it's just one simple glucose molecule, and so then when you eat it, the sugar goes into your bloodstream much quicker than starches. Now, some starches can actually really digest pretty quickly as well, especially if they're processed. So if you look at a piece of wheat, if you go out in the field and you pick a piece of wheat, it has the fiber on there, it's not processed, so it takes longer to digest it. But then with processing and remove fiber, and then if we puff it or we flake it, like when we make cold cereal, then that's even extra processing, and that increases the digestibility even more. So that actually is the problem. It sounds like, oh, it's good, it's digestible, but that's what has to do with blood glucose spiking. So if you eat foods that are very digestible or they have been very processed, it means that you digest it faster and it enters your bloodstream faster, it spikes your blood sugar up, and your pancreas doesn't have time to react to that. Okay. Remember, type 2 diabetes has to do also with the pancreas does make insulin, but it doesn't make as much. We're insufficient in how much insulin we make, so the pancreas is a little slow and it's insufficient in how much it's making insulin. So the whole goal of for diabetes is to really eat food that doesn't digest really fast. We want it to kind of stick to the ribs a little bit more. People that have heard of carbohydrate counting. So that's what this part is about. A standard portion of carbohydrate is 15 grams. That's just what we have concluded. That's what we call a portion of carbohydrate. So 15 grams is a portion. And how many grams of carbohydrate should we eat is often, that's the question, right? There's not really, a rule about this. It isn't that humans, must have a certain amount. Some people eat the keto diet. That's not a diet that's recommended to continue to have for over long periods of time, but it's not to say that we, have to have carbs all the time. I think what I tend to look at is how many grams of carbohydrate should we have in one sitting? Because again, the pancreas is insufficient. So try to shoot for having 30 to 45 grams per meal is a good general rule of thumb. Yes, you can have less carbohydrate, but typically, if you have more than 30 to 45, maybe up to 60 for some people, grams of carbohydrate per meal, we tend to be higher because the pancreas is more insufficient. So this is kind of a quick and dirty rule of thumb if when you're looking at your labels and how much carbohydrate should I be eating. So again, remember, the carbohydrates, again, are starches, fruits, milk, and yogurt. And so you can find, the portion sizes and labels. So let me look at the label, and I'll come back to this slide. Okay, so on your label, you look at what is the portion size up at the top, and then total carbohydrate is what you want to look at. So this particular food, 1 cup of this food gives you 31 grams. So that's pretty much the amount of carbohydrate you'd want in a meal. This food might also include some sugars within the total carbohydrate. So again, the total carbohydrate number is really the main thing you want to look at, and sugars is part of that number. So, get used to looking at your labels. It's very helpful. Okay, so here's some quick tips on, what to eat. So the green light foods, and green light into, quick tips on diet is diet sodas, flavored seltzer, non-sweetened tea, any kind of drinks with less than 5 grams of carbohydrate are just fine. And diet things like, Splenda, Equal, those are fine. Those are considered safe by the FDA. So I don't believe that, diet drinks is such a big problem. I know that there's been a lot of debate about that, but, for the most part, the FDA has deemed that non-sugar sweeteners are just fine. A good quick and dirty thing to eat for breakfast, if you're just, wondering, I'm really not feeling hungry in the morning, what should I just eat first thing in the morning if I don't really feel like eating breakfast, would be wheat bread with peanut butter. That's a really nice, quick breakfast. It's just something to literally just break the fast. You don't need to eat a whole lot. But having some food in the morning with protein helps to set the stage for the whole rest of the day. When people just simply fast all day long, then their blood sugars are often much more out of whack than if they eat a little something in the morning. So it doesn't have to be something elaborate, but what you're looking for is something with some protein and then a little bit of starch. So an English muffin, for instance, would be just fine, as opposed to over here on the other side of the red light, bagels are a real problem. So an English muffin could be a good substitute for a bagel. Berries are kind of a good fruit in the morning. So berries have a lot of nutritional value, but they're low in sugar. So what I don't really recommend much is the high sugar fruits first thing in the morning, like bananas and pineapples and grapes. So a lot of my recommendations here on this side have to do with breakfast, you'll notice. So the breakfast meal tends to make blood sugar tends to go up the most after the first meal of the day. On the other hand, I'm not saying that you should fast. You do want to eat something, but if you eat something that really spikes your blood sugar up first thing in the morning, typically your blood sugar then is more elevated, or it's really much more variable all day long. So what you eat for that very first little meal sets the stage for the rest of the day. So again, what I'm recommending is foods that are lower in carbohydrate and always include some protein. So cottage cheese can be a great thing to have in the morning. Cottage cheese is a true protein. There's no carbs in it. Greek yogurt has a little bit of carbs, but not as much as your normal carbs. And then having whole grains, because whole grains will digest slower. They won't spike. Beans, lentils, peas, these are great carbs. These digest a lot slower. So again, a diet for people with diabetes isn't necessarily a no-carb diet. It's just a moderate carb diet and then having carbohydrates that are not so processed. The foods that will really make you go up high, though, first thing in the morning, if you're including things like smoothies, because it's liquid, these things tend to digest faster and spike you. If you do have smoothies, have a very high protein and low carbohydrate smoothie. But generally, I think you're still better off with just peanut butter toast. So drinkable yogurts have a lot of sugar. All juices, tons of sugar. Sodas, Gatorade, vitamin water. Sweet flavored coffee creamer, boxed cereals, cold cereals. So this is my pet peeve. General Mills and Kellogg's really have been doing a number on us for many years, telling us that it's, a very nutritious breakfast. But these are actually considered ultra-processed foods. So even Cheerios without added sugar is very, very processed. It looks nothing like oats, right? Cheerios is supposed to be made from oats, but that's already very processed. And then when they puff things and they flake things, that's extra processing. So when you eat cold cereals, you digest it so quickly, it spikes your blood sugar from 100 to 300. I've seen it many times. So I would completely avoid cold cereals. And then bagels. Bagels are a problem because they're just so dense. Eating a bagel is like eating about 5 pieces of bread. Pastries and muffins, right? They're very processed, plus they have a lot of bad fats in them. And then high sugar fruits, just be a little bit more mindful, be very mindful of your portion sizes. And I wouldn't eat them first thing in the morning. So we have this thing, a real quick way to look at, a good diet is, really a good diet for anybody. There's no special diet for somebody with diabetes per se. I would tell everybody to eat like this. This is the plate method. So the plate method is saying, look at your plate. Half your plate should be vegetables. For dinner, really good tip is to have a cooked vegetable and a fresh vegetable. So we should be eating something fresh every day, some fresh veggies. So half the plate veggies, and then a quarter of the plate some starch, and a quarter of the plate some protein, so that this part is balanced out. You're balancing your proteins and your carbs, and then you're adding a lot of veggies. And here's where you're getting lots of vitamins and minerals in your vegetables. Fruits, yes, they have vitamins and minerals also, but they have sugar. So if you lean much more toward your veggies, you can get your vitamins and minerals, but without the sugar. And then you can minimize your fruit a little bit, maybe just having like 1 to 2 fruits in a day. That would be less of a sugar load. So that's very important for people who are really struggling with keeping their blood sugars down. Consider how much fruit you're eating. It's a significant amount of sugar. Okay, so the quick diet recommendations: eat at least 2 meals a day, preferably 3. You might not think of your breakfast meal necessarily as a meal. You can think of it as just a little snack, but breaking that fast is helpful to kind of prime the pump and get your body going and start burning calories a little bit better. We burn calories more efficiently when we eat within an hour of waking up. And you balance your meals with protein. Always increase your veggies. Limit your fruit to 3 servings in a day. Don't drink your calories, and make your dinner the smallest meal of the day. All right, we're back to me. How are we doing on time?
Good. Yeah, we're pretty good. I think you timed yourself perfectly.
Excellent. So now we have a fair amount of time for questions.
The first question is, my doctor is testing my A1C about every 3 months instead of daily glucose monitoring. Is this adequate for diabetes management?
I do often recommend to just use the A1C for people that may be more in the pre-diabetes range. If you're just in the pre-diabetes range and you can kind of take these basic diet recommendations, and then you would see that it made a big difference in your A1C, and now you're back down to normal. Great, that's definitely a good way to go. Rather than always using, so I don't always recommend using a glucose monitor. I think if your A1C is elevated and you're struggling with getting it down, that's when you really want to then get yourself a meter and then use your meter. That's your tool for troubleshooting. So again, your A1C is your average, so it's looking at, okay, overall I'm high, but now I need to know where am I high. So that's how you use a glucose meter, again, as a tool. But if you can get it down, just by kind of following the basic diet recommendations, then awesome.
Our next question, how can you satisfy your sweet tooth and the cravings for carbs while managing diabetes?
Yeah, isn't that the $1 million question? Sugar is very addictive. It is more addictive than salt. They've actually done lots of studies on people and on rats, and sugar is the most addictive thing. So it's certainly the challenge. What drives addiction is frequency. So if you tend to have sugar, if you find that I'm having a little bits after every meal, then that increases the frequency, and that will drive even more drive to have more sugar. So I would say to begin by cutting it back. Really try to put some boundaries around it. See if you can get something like dark chocolate or something that's really rich and really small, and just giving yourself one little treat a day. And so that's just kind of a good way to start, is just recognizing how often are you having that sugar, and then so minimizing it. Now starches too. I think it's often that we want this feeling of fullness in our tummies, right? We like that feeling of nice and full, and the fat and happy idea. Well, which we often will get from starches and meat. I think, that's kind of what we eat a lot in this country, right? Starch and meat and starch and meat. So what you want to do, of course, is increase your vegetables. Start your meal with a big salad. Start your meal with maybe some fresh cut-up veggies. Maybe you can, either buy a vegetable tray or buy vegetables, cut them all up, keep them in the fridge. When you're really hungry, you put those fresh veggies out there. A little bit of low-fat dip, like you can get low-fat ranch. Eat that first. You will feel more full, and you won't be driven as much to have the starches. So again, it's also staying ahead of your hunger. If you wait till you get too hungry, that's when people start thinking, ooh, what sounds really good to eat, right? So have your breakfast.
Our next question, after how long of taking medication for prediabetes if your results are showing that your blood sugar is being controlled?
Not quite understand the question. How long after take medications? What's the question about?
Yeah, I think that if I had to guess, because if I had to guess, maybe this person was taking medication to manage their prediabetes, but they're also monitoring their blood sugar regularly, and it's showing that it's being controlled. So perhaps they're wondering, well, when can I stop taking medication?
Okay. Yeah, so the American Diabetes Association made a recommendation a while back to have people with prediabetes use metformin. So metformin is the most common diabetes medication in the world, and its job is to make our cells more sensitive to the insulin we make. So it's like a sensitizer, and it's thought that if you take metformin, it makes the cells of your body more easily take up the insulin that you secrete. So when we do that, then the pancreas doesn't have to work so hard. Then we don't over-secrete the insulin in order to have the cells be able to absorb glucose. And so that's always the thing that keeps diabetes from progressing, okay? The more the pancreas has to work hard and has to really work on making more insulin, the more it progresses diabetes, means that it makes your beta cells die off. So the theory goes that if we take metformin, it alleviates so much work on the pancreas. So how long until you stop? Well, metformin is meant to be one of those things that you just continue to always take. It's not that we're going to necessarily, boom, just cure it, per se. But if you're able to lose weight and get more fit, then, you can have that discussion. That might be a good time to talk with your doctor about stopping metformin at that point.
Perfect. Our next question, if we are pre-diabetic, what actions can we take to avoid getting diabetes?
All the stuff I talked about. Look at your sleep schedule. Look at your stress. Look at your fitness level is huge for prediabetes. If you have more muscle and you're more physically fit, especially going to go back, have more muscle, you have more ability to burn sugar. So being much more active than you were in the past, if that's the issue. So usually you're going to hear weight loss. You always hear weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. Yes, but how do you go about that weight loss, right? Less of an emphasis on the actual weight, to kind of take driving, looking at the scale, and just thinking about, more like how healthy am I? How fit am I? Taking yourself out for a walk in the sunshine, alleviate the stress, moving more. That goes a really long way to prevent diabetes. And then making sure you have a really good routine. Don't fall into that, those are kind of bad practices of staying up too late, waking up too late, not eating in the morning, and then eating a heavy meal at night, right? Good old-fashioned, advice, which is eat your breakfast in the morning, eat your lunch, very light dinner, and more exercise. And that really does reverse diabetes, or at least keeps it in check.
And I wonder how related that question would be to our next question. How would you control high blood pressure?
High blood pressure? Yeah, they go hand in hand. Part of the reason is that when we have high blood sugar, the sugar will stick to the lining of your arteries, and then it makes your arteries more rigid, and then that drives your blood pressure up. That's what blood pressure is often about. It's about rigidity of your arteries. So blood sugar plays a role. your fitness level plays a really big role. When you are more physically fit and your blood is pumping and your heart is pumping, it makes your arteries more flexible. So all of those things, again, sleep, all of those things drive down blood pressure.
And Nicole,
all kind of the general lifestyle.
I want to hone in on the word fitness. What does that necessarily mean? Does it mean you have to be really toned, or does it really mean like physical exercise and heart health? Like how your heart is able to manage the blood pumping in and out when you're exercising? I guess just asking you to clarify what would fitness count as?
Yeah. So overall fitness, you look at a few different components of it. It has to do with, your aerobic activity, your ability to have sustained movement, whether it's, dancing or walking or a slow jog. So that would be like your aerobic fitness, and that has to do with your heart and your lung strength. And then there's also the fitness of having muscle. And then there's also flexibility and agility. So all of those things actually are components. And so when we talk about somebody being well fit overall, you actually want all three of those components. So, this whole idea of cross-training is really kind of important. So with cross-training, we're saying, go to an aerobics type of thing, maybe do a jog or a fast walk once a week, and then another day of the week do some muscle strengthening. Whether maybe you're going upstairs because you're also, getting more leg muscle, doing some weights looking at your abdominal muscles, your arm muscles, so that you want literally more muscle, and so it's strength. And then the stretching and being flexible. So all of those components are super important. So sometimes things like, classes are really good for that, or to change things up. That's what the idea of cross-training is about. So if you're somebody who just walks all the time, I walk for fitness, that's what I do. Well, that's great. That's only one component, though. To, up your game a little bit, maybe add some hand weights and not like heavy hand weights, maybe more just like 1 or 2 pounds. So when you're walking and you're upright, now you're also engaging the upper body and you're getting your arms stronger. And then you look really goofy out there on the path, do some punching and, use those hand weights. And then at the end, after you've actually been warmed up, do your stretching and flexibility. So things like jazzercise, Tai Chi, I think doing a class once a week, the instructors of these types of classes, they're really pros. And they really do know how to, engage all the muscles and incorporate all those fitness recommendations. So, yeah, doing a class once a week, and then maybe walking once a week, and then maybe taking yourself for a longer hike on the weekend. So trying to exercise, at least 3 days a week and doing different things.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent answer. It's different things. I walk a whole ton, but I have lower back pain if I stand for too long, and that's because I need to work on my muscles. So hearing you say that fitness is all of these components, that's really important. The next question is about family history for type 2 diabetes. What can this person do to prevent diabetes for themselves, and how early should they start having conversations about prevention with their kids?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Absolutely love that question. Yeah, it starts in childhood. It really does. I have a lot of diabetes in my family, and when I realized that, which I have a really open family, luckily. Some people hush, hush, don't talk about it. But, be open about it. It's not something shameful, right? We should all know, hey, we've got diabetes in our family. that means that our body doesn't do well with a lot of sugar. We don't do well if we get overweight and we, are not really fit. So, within families, there's often people that have the genetics for diabetes, and they might not develop it because perhaps, they stayed pretty fit and maybe they didn't, they never got overweight. So in my family history, I can kind of, put together the pieces of who had what. I believe my grandmother on my dad's side probably carried the genetics, but she was always moving around so much. So that's kind of how it works. It's like, you can have the genetics, but it might not show up because, you had a good lifestyle, right? And so that is simply how it works. So many of us do have the genetics toward diabetes. Some of us have a lot more genes than others, right? Some people get kind of lucky that they have to maybe be 50, 60, 100 pounds overweight before diabetes shows up. And then other people, maybe they have even more genes for diabetes, and they only get, maybe 20 extra pounds on them, and diabetes shows up sooner. So that's actually just, kind of my theory and my observations. But we do know that type 2 is very genetic, and there's actually a lot of different genetic markers. So that's kind of how it works. So again, I always want to kind of go back to say, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's genetic, right? Some people can be 600 pounds. Remember, that 600-pound life, 600 pounds, and not have diabetes. So, remember that always if you start feeling kind of bad about it, right? So, some people just don't have the genetics, but most of us do have some component of genetics. So when you do, I do start young with my kids. I've always told them, no, don't drink juice. You don't want to develop that sweet, especially the sweet liquids for little babies. We should never be giving babies juice. It's breast milk, formula. Don't give them a lot of sweets because they don't know the difference. They don't need it. And juice boxes, cold cereal, things like that. Kids really should not be eating that stuff. Just having normal food, just like I outlined for everyone. And the less that we kind of tax a kid's body early on. If you get your kid drinking soda pop, especially like throughout their teenage years, you can imagine that pop of sugar into their bloodstream makes their pancreas have to work hard. And that kind of insult over and over and over to the body will progress diabetes. So early onset of type 2 is, it starts showing up in the 30s. That's early onset, right? In the old days, we used to really not see diabetes showing up until maybe 75 to 80 years old. Because the pancreas, it's almost normal in a way to develop some component of prediabetes, right? Because it's an organ that ages. And so we just get a little bit insufficient as we age. And, it's no problem for the most part if you develop diabetes so late in life. But if we're getting it at the age of 30 or 20, big problem. Because it's how much time that your body's exposed to the sugar is what predicts having any kind of chronic complications.
Thank you for that. How much time should you allow between meals to allow insulin processing?
Oh, that's a good question. So rapid-acting insulin, like the Humalog, the Novolog, the Admalog, you inject it, it starts to go into the bloodstream in about 15 minutes. It peaks about 1 to 2 hours, and then it's pretty much used up by about 3 hours. So it kind of follows and tracks really well with our diet. So, usually when we eat our carbs, we digest our food after about 15 minutes. It's kind of almost most of the carbs have hit our bloodstream 1 to 2 hours. And so, when you take the insulin right before the meal, it just covers that meal really well. And then after 3 hours, it's pretty much used up. You'll also see, don't take insulin sooner than 4 hours apart. So some people, their insulin does hang around a little bit longer than 3 hours, but 3 hours is usually about the average time.
Laura wants to know if you have fatty liver, how would you know, other than I guess like going to your doctors and getting a diagnosis?
Yeah, fatty liver. So fatty liver is so common. It's pretty much in all of us that have that body type, you know. The people that have the pear body, where they're real slender in the middle, and then they carry most of their weight on their legs and their thighs, they really store their calories different, you know. We're kind of different birds. We're different kind of, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of dogs in the world, a lot of different kinds of humans in the world. So the people that are storing their calories around their legs don't really have very much fatty liver. It's very uncommon. It's really pretty much like you can basically see it. You know, you're carrying your weight right around the middle. And most people that are overweight and carrying their weight around the middle do have fatty liver. So it's very, very common. It doesn't mean that it's always bad. There is a subset of people with fatty liver that do have a big problem with it because the fatty liver causes inflammation, and then that leads to cirrhosis and big problems. And we're doing there's a lot of research right now surrounding that to try to predict who's going to have, you know, the problematic fatty liver. But again, it is very common, and it's very intertwined with type 2. So again, you know, what do we do? What do we do to treat it? Well, it's especially lower carbs, and of course it's lower calories, because, you know, we have to store all of our calories. So all calories count, especially the carb calories count.
All right. Our next question is, what role does cortisol play in type 2? Because it is related to stress.
Yeah, huge. People that have chronic stress, you know, cortisol and adrenaline both, the role is that it makes glucose go up from the liver, right? Those stress hormones pushes out glucose, especially from the liver, so that we have something to burn. You know, like if the tiger, you know, leaps out and scares us, the blood sugar goes up so that we can use that quick burst of energy to run away, right? So that's like the stress response. So both cortisol and also adrenaline plays the role. So if you have chronic stress where you're always having, you know, things that are making you on high alert, or just, you're not sleeping well, you're worrying about, you know, finances, it takes a toll on the body. It takes a huge toll on the body. You know, the body keeps the score, and it does drive a lot of chronic diseases, just one of which is diabetes.
Thank you for that. Janet wants to know, or wants to clarify, because she understood that before meals, fasting would be considered lower than 115, and that after meals, your blood sugar should be between 160 to 180. Is there a huge difference?
No, there's not a huge difference. The official American Diabetes Association, you know, statement about, you know, what are target numbers. You know, those are the numbers that I use, and the target numbers is between always above 70, because you don't want to have low blood sugar. So they loosely say 80 to 130 before meals, and that could be before breakfast, otherwise known as fasting, or before any meal. So before meals, ADA says between 80 and 130, and after meals, no higher than 180. But, you know, yes, if your doctor has given you more specific targets, that's great, because the targets from a doctor is meant to be individualized, maybe according to your age and your need for blood sugar control. So the younger someone is, the tighter control you want. Okay? Someone that's older, you don't even necessarily have to have such strict targets. You know, we loosen those targets because the targets are based on having good control overall, with the thought of, are you going to develop chronic complications? right? And so, if you're quite a bit older, chronic complications takes time to build up. So if you're quite a bit older, we don't have to really worry about, having heart disease and somebody who's already 80. You're going to be fine there. You've already made it to 80. We're not going to worry about, having, atherosclerosis so much. But you would worry about being so very sweet that maybe you would get like a urinary tract infection. So keeping the blood sugars down to maybe no higher than 250. So it just, so it kind of depends on the population. But the ADA numbers is good to know.
Okay. This next question, why don't we use Greek yogurt, because that was on your list, as an example. If a person is eating a 5-ounce container of Greek yogurt, would that yield about 15 to 20 grams of the allotted carbs?
So what I'd say about, any kind of yogurts, you just look at your label. You got to go back to the labels of every single food. There's thousands of food products out there now, but you will find that as a trend, Greek yogurt, they've gotten rid of some of the milk sugar, so it's a little less carb and a little more protein. But in general, though, the whole role of protein, especially for your breakfast meal, is to make your meal digest slower, so that you don't have a spike in blood sugar after that meal. And Greek yogurt, I don't really think does such a great job. It might be, maybe individualized, but I kind of fall back on something more like cottage cheese or a solid cheese like a mozzarella or eggs or peanut butter. Those kinds of foods kind of stick to the ribs a little more, and they make the blood sugar have a nice gentle rise. So, so the general rule of thumb, that's what I recommend, but then the true proof is using a glucose meter and testing it 1 hour after the meal. So basically, you find a meal you like, and then you test it 1 hour after that meal, and you say, hey, can I get away with this? Does it make my blood sugar okay? Right? And if it does, awesome.
That's really important. And CHRC has a video on reading nutrition labels. I will link that in the post-event email, because I think there should be a lot of emphasis on educating yourself when you shop in stores with so many products. Moving on to our next question, would hot oatmeal be good to eat in the morning for breakfast?
Hot oatmeal, it can be. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Test your 1 hour after. Some people do pretty well with oatmeal, and some people don't. I don't know why it's so variable, but I find that oatmeal and potatoes, those are the two things I've always found are more variable amongst people. It might be how you cook it. It might be, how thick we make it. But keep in mind, oatmeal is carbohydrate. It's a starch. It's, 100% carbohydrate. And so you're asking yourself, can my body tolerate this much carbohydrate at one sitting? For many people, yes, oatmeal is a good food. It's a very healthy food. It's got, a lot of vitamins and minerals, but it is all starch. Maybe what you need to do is cut the oatmeal serving in half and then add some protein to it, right? What I use a lot, I'll do like slivered almonds, and I put quite a bit of slivered almonds in there for the protein. And then it just, holds me even longer. I can go, 3-4 hours with feeling full. So it's partly that you're listening to how full are you, and then testing your after meals.
Our last question today will have to be, somebody's a little bit shocked that you included diet soda on that list. I think they're worried about no nutritious value in there. So if you could respond and give us your thoughts.
Sure. No, of course there's no nutritional value, but there's no nutritional value in candy either, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't sometimes eat things just because they're, absolutely. I didn't put it up there saying oh, you should eat this, but, for people that, soda is so ubiquitous in the world and people love it. You go just about anywhere, 4th of July is coming up, the backyard barbecue. People want to have something that's special to drink, right? So it's not the worst thing in the world to have a diet soda. It really, they're considered safe. These artificial sweeteners are safe. We're not eating them in huge quantities. I personally wouldn't, drink more than maybe, 2 sodas, diet sodas in a day. But, as a special occasion, sure, why not? It doesn't hurt us. And, again, artificial sweeteners have been tested and tested, and they are safe. We break them down and we digest them into these components, so the body just, uses it up. So aspartame, which is what equal is, it's 2 amino acids linked together that just tricks our taste buds. So these artificial sweeteners on our taste buds, it seems like they're sweet, but they're not giving us calories, and it's not sugar. So I'm saying, hey, why not? We get to have, something that's kind of nice in this world that's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, and I also want to share in that sentiment because a lot about managing chronic conditions is not too cold turkey and abstain from absolutely everything. Something we preach here at CHRC is moderation, moderation. And perhaps the worrying thing about diet soda is if you drink diet soda, you might not feel thirsty enough to drink water, perhaps, and then you might get a little bit more dehydrated. But
maybe. Some aren't necessarily diuretic. What makes something a diuretic is that you end up peeing out more than you take in. And so, diet sodas, they're liquid just like anything else. So they're really, they're okay. I'm not saying they're a health drink, but yeah, and by the same thing, what do I do about alcohol? So diet, yes, could be. I often will do in our diabetes classes at our diabetes center. We'll spend 2 hours on diet alone, and talking about, anything from alcohol to sodium and the right kinds of fats. So yeah, there's a lot, in diabetes for diet, or there's just a lot, it's a whole major, right? I have a whole BS degree just on diet. We've been eating since we were born, and yet we need a degree to know how to eat. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I guess the world is pretty chaotic with all of these choices you can choose from, and it's become really hard to make the right choices for your body. And that's why you're here, Nicole. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put behind all of everybody's questions, and we have so many more that I will download and include in our next lecture. Nicole, is there anything else you wanted to leave everyone with before we close out today?
Keep the hope, and don't be too hard on yourself. But it's been my pleasure. Thank you all.